זה השבוע התשיעי שבו מתקיימות ברחבי הארץ
הפגנות שרק הולכות ומתרחבות, עשרות מוקדי מחאה גם ברחובות, בחיפה, בקרקור, בצומת גומא בגליל העליון, ערד.
לקרוא לנו אנרכיסט? טרוריסט?
אתם אנרכיסטים? אתם טרוריסטים? לא, אתם פטריוטים!
יש יותר אנשים משבוע שעבר.
אסתר חיות וגלי בהרב מיארה. הוטל עליכן אחד התפקידים הכי קשים והכי חשובים בהיסטוריה של מדינת ישראל. זו השעה שלכן.
בשעה 8 התחילו כאן המפגינים לשיר את שירת התקווה.
כ-5,000, כך אומרים במשטרה, נמצאים כאן.
עלייה במספר המשתתפים, 35,000 מפגינים.
בתוך ההמולה של ההפגנה מול בית הנשיא בירושלים.
זה איזה מראה, איזה עוצמה.
לצה"ל, לשב"כ, למוסד ולמשטרת ישראל, אם חס וחלילה יגיע רגע האמת, תבחרו נכון, תיכנסו לספרי ההיסטוריה כמי שהגנו על האזרחים, לא על הרודנים.
גם ההורים שלי, הם אומרים, אני ביביסט, אבל אני איתכם, אני לא רוצה את זה.
נתניהו, לוין, רוטמן, יש לכם 64 אצבעות, אבל זה לא אומר שמותר לכם לדחוף את האצבעות האלה לכל מקום שבא לכם. תעצרו את ההפיכה או שנעצור את המדינה.
Hello and welcome everybody to our second podcast of Israel's Slippery Slope. What you're seeing right now is a drone shot from a demonstration that took place in Tel Aviv last week with 160,000 people. The real thing. This is not, this is not some sort of special production. Amazing stuff. The sign itself said, from startup nation to shutdown nation. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. Hi, that's me. We apologize for our technical glitches here, but we're cooking. And welcome again. This is our second of our podcast series. We're going to be doing podcasts probably once or twice a week from now on, depending on what's developing in the country. We're not going to be spending too much time right now on introducing ourselves. Right now in the studio with me is my co-host Ron Ziv. Good to have you with me, Ron.
Great to be here.
And we're not. If you want to know more about Ron and myself, very quickly, we're both from Los Angeles. Came to Israel in 1970s from the Haaretz Socialist Zionist Youth Movement. Enough for now. If you want to see more about that, go to our first podcast. We introduce ourselves more in depth. Just to give you an idea of what we will be talking about, we're only going to be talking about saving Israeli democracy. And to give you a sort of an idea of what that means, what's happening right now, let's use an example of a basketball game plan, where in a game plan, a coach will talk about who's going to get the ball, who's going to pass it to the high point, are we going to do three-pointers, or are we going to be running out the clock, or whatever. All that is strategy. What's happening now in Israel is not about the strategy and changing this or that in the game plan. This is changing the game. We're talking about resetting the height of the basket, the weight of the ball, the shape of the court. Almost the entire rule book is being changed, and nobody can say anything about it. Those who want to change it have the power, and that's exactly what they're doing. And it's all happening within a 6-week blitz. a legislative blitz that by the end of March, it'll all be over. Unfortunately, we're hoping also that our democracy will not be over, but that's what it's looking at. So just you should understand, we're not going to be talking about the occupation. We're not going to be talking about all of the problems of Israel. This isn't also about flag waving the Israeli flag and standing with us or anything like that. We're only talking about the exact problem of saving Israel's democracy. So if you'll give me 1 second here, I'm going to share something with you here. Okay, here we go.
Netanyahu is trying to weaken the Supreme Court and to weaken legal councils in order to be above the law, in order to turn Israel from a succeeding democracy to dictatorship, because he's accused in 3 severe criminal charges and he's just trying to evade his criminal trial. That's why he sacrificed this entire country, our democracy, our freedom, our rights, and we will not allow him to do that. Not in our name. We won't agree to that.
Wow. Heavy stuff. Stop sharing that screen somehow. Okay. One more thing that we want to show you. By the way, that was a video from what's called Democrat TV, which is an internet television platform, and they're doing great stuff all along. Now we're going to show you one more thing here that's been happening last week, and this is big time. This was a demonstration arranged by American Israelis who were protesting in front of the Israeli embassy. So here we go. Okay, Ron.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say how honored and humbled I am to be co-piloting this second podcast with Moshe Chertoff, Moshe the Mighty. And we want to thank all the 600 viewers who watched our first podcast in the first couple of days. I want to first of all apologize because those of you, especially who know me a little bit, Moshe, we kind of use sometimes colorful language to get our point across. Sometimes we're a little cynical. Sometimes we joke around a little bit. But
we never exaggerate.
We never exaggerate. So take things with my late mother-in-law and I had a deal where whenever I was making a joke, I was being sarcastic, I raised my hand, and that was the sign that that was a joke. So I will try, or we will try, to abide by that. So none of you get offended, and we'll move right along.
We never offend anybody.
Never have. So for
we try
all
not to.
Right. So I want to also say to all of the Anglophile world, if that's the United States, Canada, Great Britain, all of the English-speaking, Australia, New Zealand, wherever it is, South Africa, wherever you may be, we have you all in mind, and this is for you to keep you updated, for you to keep you the blitz that is going on at the moment. And the news this morning has said that it's even going to go faster than previously thought. The American ambassador to Israel, Ambassador Nidus, asked Benjamin Netanyahu to please, and I'm quoting, pump the brakes a little bit. Don't go so fast. Let's stop Israel's slippery slope. And you are here at the ISS podcast where we are watching how quickly we are slipping. And instead of stopping or pumping, Benjamin Netanyahu has done exactly the opposite. He's full throttle, all speed ahead. So let's go and get on with it.
Sorry. So what you were watching there was a video from a town in the West Bank called Efrat, mostly religious, mostly right-wing Jews who are also joining this protest, just to give you an idea that this is not a protest of right versus left, of those who are opposed to occupation or in favor of occupation. This is all about saving Israel's democracy. About that, Ron, how about you give us some updates as to what's been going on?
Well, there are a few things that have been floating around, but I want to put, let me make the first thing that's really going through very, very quickly, and that is the kosher laws for the hospitals in Israel. They want to make sure, as we mentioned in the first podcast, and you can go back and see our summary there, they want to make sure that all of the Israeli hospitals are kosher in Pesach, where the managers of the hospitals can decide whether they're going to introduce a law that essentially only kosher food can be brought into Israeli hospitals. This especially is an unfair law, to say the least. Moshe and I live in the Western Galilee, and in the Western Galilee, where the majority of the population are non-Jews, to put on them this law is, of course, unethical. But why are they so rushing at this point? Well, all of us know that Passover is around the corner. They want to make sure that this gets passed as soon as possible. And we're all very, very uptight about where this is going.
Right. In our first podcast, we mentioned the 5 laws that they passed in one day as part of their blitz. And what Ron was just referring to is number 4 here, the not kosher for Passover law. And the other one that came after it was to give the rabbinical courts jurisdiction in all sorts of civil cases. Both of these are heading or pushing us toward a theocracy. This is very heavy stuff.
Yeah, and generally speaking, if I could intercede, just generally speaking, I think that the population that is going to be most hurt by all of these laws that are coming in and future laws that are in the making are the women of Israel, who there's now a law floating around that in shopping centers or in public places, there will be a separation of women and men. We're not talking about just public transportation. We're talking about public places. So that's what's floating around now. We're talking about perhaps women will not be allowed to serve in the armed forces anymore. Very, very dangerous, misogynist laws that are being put forth.
Okay, before we get to our special guest for this week's podcast, just wanted to show you something else where Ron and I took part in a big demonstration. Briefly, it's at a junction in the middle of the Western Galilee, not in any city, middle of nowhere, middle of avocado fields and Arab villages, and this is what we saw. gentlemen, welcome to the Western Galilee. This is the Cabri Junction, just in Galilee. Amazing. Wow, wow, wow. Wow. Okay, what you were seeing was a protest of approximately 700 people in the Western Galilee. I'm sorry, I don't know what's making that noise in the background, but I will speak. Sorry. So, that was what was happening. We're going to be bringing in our special guest right now. Everybody, here she is. Welcome, Allison. Welcome, Allison.
Hi. Hi.
How are you?
Good. I'm good. I'm good.
Good to have you with us. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, so the question was, I'm sorry. The question was, in your journalism career of many years already, what was the most important or outstanding moment in your career up until now?
I think I would say the most memorable night of journalism for me was the night of the Rabin assassination, when Yitzhak Rabin was killed. I was at that rally, and so I attended the rally, and it was very moving. I went back to my home. I lived only a few blocks away from Rabin Square, and I was writing the story about the rally, what Rabin said, how everyone was reacting, and then all of a sudden got the news that he had been attacked and shot, and I rushed back to the square and I covered it, and I covered the aftermath, and I spoke with everybody. It seemed really just surreal and out of time. I ran back home and wrote my story about what had happened then, and then finally, after I finished writing, I kind of went back to the square just to sort of process and understand what had happened, and there were all of the. It was quite clear then that he was gone, that he was dead, and there were all the young people with the candles, and it was a very sort of intense night, intense moment. So I would say up to this point that was probably the most.
And for Americans to understand it in the proper context, if you were old enough in America to remember when Kennedy was assassinated, you would remember exactly where you were. You remember the weather. You remember so much about that moment. It's one of those moments that you'll never forget. But how do you compare that with what is happening right now, with what's happening today?
Well, that was a shocking, immediate moment, a shocking, immediate experience. There was fallout, there was an aftermath, but it was, a single event. And I think that this whole process of, week after week, the protests, the people on the streets, the extended battle is, I guess, it feels like more of a transformation of a societal movement rather than sort of one news event happening. So it feels more, I guess, ongoing and something that you have to keep paying attention to and keeps evolving and changing rather than this big boom and then what happens in the aftermath of it. It's constantly evolving and you just don't know in which direction it's heading.
And if you could capsulize where we are right now, what is the state in Israel for people who aren't here? How would you give them a feeling, a taste of what's really going on, other than the videos we just saw?
Well, I think, as in every society when something's going on, I think that, some people feel the crisis. Some people choose to live in their own little day-to-day bubbles and don't feel it so much, but it seems to be really penetrating almost every aspect of society. I mean, it's just people are building this now into their weekly routines. People are joking, what do you do on a Saturday night? Dinner and a protest. That it's just become, the resistance or to it.
The social side of protesting.
Right, exactly. Part of people's everyday lives that even my friends in the Trump era, I mean, I think, for people, at least in the United States, it's a little bit comparable to 2017 when Trump got in and he started bombarding everyone, with the Muslim ban and he really seemed to be in a process of trying to transform the way the government worked and everyone was standing up to it, and it felt like a fire hose of events that every time you would try to react and respond to one outrage, you would have another outrage thrown at you. So it was very difficult for journalists in the news cycle because you wanted to seriously follow up on what was happening, and while you were doing that, something else happened to distract you from it. But it's more serious than what happened in the Trump era, because in America, the balance of powers, the separation of powers is such that you can't just wave a magic wand and say, I'm going to change the Constitution. You have to have, votes in all of the states. It's a very
checks and balances.
Yeah, there is a path in the U.S. to changing the Constitution, but it's a much more, complicated and difficult path that requires so much more buy-in from so many more parts of the population. And the way that the Israeli system is structured is it gives someone compared it to the Supreme Court is like it's like a missile launcher that's placed on a pile of sand, and that it's got so much power right now, but the basis on which it's standing can pretty much be wiped away. And that's
you use an interesting term there that not all Israelis are familiar with. Constitution.
Yeah,
we don't have that, which is mainly
Israelis are aware of the fact that they lack one, and that we have this compilation of basic laws inside of it. But the Supreme Court is so powerful, but the pillars on which it stands are so weak, and its weakness is showing right now, because what this government is doing is very quickly, easily, and efficiently, if they have their way, if the current protest movement doesn't stand in their way, can completely eliminate the power that the Supreme Court has.
Great, and tell me something. So how do you see this playing out?
Well, right now everyone's, they're beginning to finally talk about a compromise. I think that, Benjamin Netanyahu is a very sophisticated political player, I think, and knows a lot about sort of like pushing things as far as he can possibly do and then pulling back when he needs to. I think he's very unhappy with the way Yariv Levin has, sold this to the people, and the amount. I don't think Netanyahu anticipated the amount of pushback. I think he's very unhappy with the current situation, but I think he's also in a trap. I think that Netanyahu's coalition partners are laying down the law and saying this has got to go through the way. I mean, he has power over Yariv Levin. If it was just Bibi versus the Likud member who's spearheading the effort, Yariv Levin, there could easily be a compromise, I think, worked out and a negotiation process. But the other partner in the judicial reforms is Simcha Rotman of the Otzma Yehudit party. And it's that extreme party and the ultra-Orthodox parties who have been waiting for this moment, literally for decades, to try to take away the power of the Supreme Court so that they can do things like institutionalize their exemptions from the army. The Otzma Yehudit party and the ultra-Orthodox parties know that they're not going to get this moment back. So they are using the pressure that they have on Netanyahu, which is considerable. They can basically topple his government if they so choose. So I think we're in a situation where Netanyahu would like to negotiate and would like to compromise. Yariv Levin wouldn't necessarily like to negotiate and compromise, but he's in the Likud party, so he's subject to Bibi. And I think that the partners, the ultra-Orthodox and the Otzma Yehudit, are saying, like, no way, no compromise. Let's shove this thing through. And so, like, those are sort of the three components of the struggle that we're seeing. There's the protest movement against it. There's Netanyahu / Levin, who has to do what Netanyahu says. And there's the extreme coalition partners who want no compromise and no negotiation. So I think it's going to be an interplay of these dynamics. I think the more that Netanyahu sees that this is going to cause real economic damage to the country, and he's going to be blamed for it, is, I think, making him very, very, very nervous. But ultimately, I have to say, at the end of the day, why is Netanyahu in this position? Because he wants to save his own skin in his own trial. He doesn't want to go to jail. And so ultimately, as much
that
as
seems to be the title of this whole thing.
Right. I always say that Netanyahu puts the I in ideology, right? It's all about so unfortunately, I think that, no matter how dire things start to look in terms of our economy, security, society, democracy, etc., I still think that Netanyahu will, as usual, prioritize himself first. And if it looks like there's no way he can, there's no other path for him to save himself other than really damaging Israeli democracy, that's what he's going to do.
We might ask you to be a prophet for a moment before we finish.
We always say that journalists, we can report on things that have happened, but we can't report on things that haven't happened yet. So
now's your chance. Here's your chance. We're going to ask you, where do you see Israel in April? After the legislative blitz, how do you see where we're going to be, what the country might look like?
Well, you're assuming there will be a legislative blitz, so there is a chance that that they could put the brakes on it. Listen, sadly, we haven't seen Hungary or Poland collapse and fall apart, right? Even though they've become less democratic. So I think the Israeli people will maybe become a little bit like the frog in the boiling water. In terms of, being outraged by this thing, but if it passes and if it becomes reality and if it becomes something that they have to cope with, the battle will just be taken to a different front. It'll be a question of what laws will the Knesset try to strike down? What decisions will the Supreme Court? It'll I think it'll be transformed from fighting this one big battle to not change the system. If the system gets changed, then it's going to become an issue-to-issue, battle-by-battle map. And hopefully people will have the energy to stay engaged in it, even if they feel like quote unquote they've lost. But unfortunately, this government really seems to be holding through it all. I wish I could say, oh yeah, it'll all make the government collapse and we'll have a new election. That's definitely not going to happen. I don't see any signs of that occurring.
Can we be optimistic? Sorry, no, that's just my. Before we let you go,
if this government collapses, it'll collapse from the right. It'll be because Bibi wasn't right wing enough. It
will implode.
Because, if he decides to cave on the reforms and his partners get mad enough at him, that they'll withdraw. But I honestly don't see either Otzma Yehudit or the ultra-Orthodox parties, no matter how angry they get at Bibi, I don't see them giving up their power quite so fast, right?
So to thank you for having been so generous as to join us and to suffer through our technical glitches and This is not a professional podcast, but we're getting there. What would you like to say to the people watching, the people in the United States or around the world who are outside of Israel? What would you ask of them or offer them?
I mean, you know, as much as they can, if they can.
Oh.
As much as they can.
Sorry.
I think I've said it before that I see this great sort of connection that happens on the other side of the political map. The Orthodox, religious, right, pro-settlement movements in abroad and in Israel seem very bonded and on the same page all the time. And I often see on the side of the map from where I sit at Haaretz, the secular Israeli progressive world and the, I won't say secular, you know, because very identified, the progressive Jews in the United States who care about Israel and care about the issues. I don't see that kind of connection between them. And I think that the glue is, you know, podcasts like yours, obviously, but the two that I participate in, I host the Haaretz Weekly podcast, and I'm on the Promise podcast, and I write for the Haaretz English language website, and we're constantly trying to increase the communication and the connection between the people who hold liberal and progressive values in the U.S. and in Israel. And unfortunately, traditionally, there's been, you know, I think just this huge divide, this huge gap, huge mentality, whatever, you know, language issues, and everyone is very focused right now on their own arena, you know, saving democracy in the United States and saving democracy in Israel. And I think the more connection and understanding and communication that can be built, probably the better the both sides have. If you're a Jew or care about Israel and America, it's just so easy, I think, to opt out, to say, like, you know, this is too much. I've had it. You know, I'm done. So, you know, the more I see people still caring and engaged, kind of the more encouraging it is.
Allison, Sommer, thank you very, very much. We greatly appreciate it, and your words are very
poignant.
Opening. We're a lot of people. In Israel, we think that people know what's going on. You've just informed them of a lot of stuff that they didn't even think about, probably. No. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
And keep up the good work.
Absolutely.
Thank
you. Rooting for you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to just add something to what Allison had said. She predicted, or semi-predicted, because no one really can, about how this is going to fold and maybe develop because of the fact that there's some kind of negotiations going, and the president of Israel, Herzog, is doing his best to get the parties together. If this doesn't go in that direction, then Israel will find itself in a constitutional crisis where the Supreme Court will say that these laws cannot be implemented, and the police, the Israeli Defense Forces, will have to decide, are they going to listen to the Supreme Court or to the elected government of Israel. So yes, we are on that ISS, the Israeli slippery slope, and it's certainly something we have to keep our eyes open.
Okay, let me give you just a very little bit of background here. In 1948, when the state was established, you don't all of a sudden come into existence with a constitution that's ready, or a whole country that's, you know, you just click on it and you get country. No. Ben-Gurion said at the beginning that we don't have time to really start a constitutional Congress with deliberations and discussions that may take years. Let's just get going, and we'll take care of getting a constitution along the way. Never happened. There have been what are called the basic laws, but they don't cut it. As we see, the fact that we don't have a constitution is maybe one of the reasons that we're where we are today. If we had a constitution, we might not be here. I will say, in regard to what Allison said, there are what I call the extreme centrists. And these are the people who say, no, let's not get angry at each other. No, let's not go fast. No, let's not condemn people in our protests. And let's just be nice and kind of kumbaya. And I prefer to say that if someone's attacking you And I think we feel we're being attacked right now. When someone's attacking you, and someone comes up to you and says, wait, why don't you just sit down and negotiate with this person? You don't negotiate with an attacker while they're attacking. And he is not going to stop his attack. So that's my view of it. I mean, even if he says, okay, we'll stop and let's talk about it now, let's negotiate it. I can't trust Netanyahu. We'll talk about that in a few more seconds. But this is not the same kind of government that existed, let's say, 2 governments ago when Netanyahu was in power. He was the prime minister. But for this time, for him to finally finish the cycle of 5 elections and come out as the prime minister, he had to bring in the most extremist, racist elements in Israeli society to be able to form a coalition and have a government. Among them are anti-democratic elements. I mean, why would they want anyone to be able to say to them, no, you can't erase an Arab village, which is what Smotrich said last week when his fanatics on the West Bank went through the village where 2 Israeli brothers were murdered in the afternoon. In the evening, they came through and had a Jewish pogrom. There's no other name for it. It was horrible. But if you're in power and you slowly but surely gain control of the police, all of the security services, the Supreme Court and everything, so what's to stop you? So he has to keep them in the tent, because if they decide to leave, then he's going to have his coalition and his government fall apart, and he's going to be back in trial in the courts. Ron, you want to tell us a few other things here?
I think that what's happening right now is that Netanyahu is very, very uptight about his upcoming court visit. And in the background, I think it's really, really important to see that Ben Gvir, who is now in charge of the police, he comes and he's saying stuff that is the stuff of a pyromaniac. He's lighting up he's just lighting up the whole area. This is now, we're coming close to the Ramadan, and he's decided that he's going all out against especially the East Jerusalem community, and it's very, very dangerous. And but that's his belief. I want to just make something very, very clear, that Netanyahu has a very bad relationship with the truth. And do I have to raise my hand for when I say that? Okay, very, very bad relationship with the truth. Sort of reminds me of the last president of the United States, maybe the 45th one, that almost everything that comes out of his mouth is some kind of fabrication. And Benjamin Netanyahu is exactly the same way, and that is one of the reasons why he could not pull into his coalition some of the saner parts of the parties that are now in the Knesset, in the parliament. They just didn't believe a word he says. The first things that he mentioned in the first meeting of the Israeli government that was recently formed, he mentioned the fact that he knows that there are issues in the Israeli society that are very, very important.
According to polls, they're at the top
according
of the polls.
And Benjamin Netanyahu is a poll junkie. He saw that the first thing that he needed to take care of is the cost of living. Israelis are suffering the cost of living, and he said that he will take care of it. The other one is a housing problem. Those who call it a housing bubble. Israelis are suffering under this incredible housing crisis that we're living through at the moment. Also, there's the problem, the third thing is individual security. Those who are following the Israeli news, Israel is a very unsafe country at the moment. I don't want to go crazy and say, it's perhaps one of the few countries in the world where Jews are attacked because of being Jews, but there is a lot of security problems also in the Arab communities. And he wanted and he said essentially that he will address this issue. The fourth and last thing is improving the education of Israel. The Israeli education is also in crisis mode. He promised to take care of all of these things. Once he said these things at the first meeting of the government, he all of a sudden began to take care of the judiciary. Take care of the judiciary. So he's put all of these other issues that are essential to Israeli society and the reasons that he was elected, put them on the back burner to make sure that this judiciary revolution takes place. Democracy out, autocracy, theocracy in. Very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else we should be remembering is that these members of his coalition there are criminals, ex-cons here. He himself is under three indictments for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. The man he appointed as the health minister and a minister in the office of the prime minister, Aryeh Deri, was convicted of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, and he was given a 3-year jail sentence. In his plea bargain, he said he would not enter politics anymore. He would not be part of a government, etc. And of course, he reneged on that. And then the Supreme Court in January had to say, no, you're out. So they're going to try to overturn that with their own Deri law. And we have Ben Gvir, who was convicted of incitement to terrorism and supporting a terrorist organization. So these are pretty heavy things. And I want to read to you something which is a fabulous development that just came out yesterday. A group of some of the top generals and officers of the IDF came out with a letter, and I'm going to read it to you very quickly. I'm going to read it fast, so please excuse me. This open letter has been signed by retired top military officers of the Israel Defense Forces. We stand against the self-coup attempt led by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This attack against our government, our democratic institutions, misleadingly called legal reform, is intended to destroy the checks and balances of the Israeli system of governance. Extremist, mercurial elements in this government could then seize control of Israel's instruments of power, especially the military, without restraint. This immediately endangers both Israel's national security and the entire region's stability. We ask you to take a clear stance in helping us protect Israeli democracy, other shared values with the United States, and the freedom of the citizens of Israel. Israeli democracy is under attack. Mr. Netanyahu's government has launched a legislative blitz against the foundations of democracy, rule of law, and civil rights. If it continues as planned, by the end of March, this government will devastate the foundations of the Israeli democratic system as we know it. This is a maneuver by a duly elected government to secure permanent and extraordinary powers. Despite mimicking the routines of the Israeli legislative process, the government has consistently and aggressively trampled the Israeli democratic legislative process. In just 2 months, since gaining approval by our parliament, the Knesset, huge strides have been made toward an authoritarian, illiberal democratic regime. Repairing the damage once legislation is complete will prove difficult. The great majority of legal experts overwhelmingly concur that neither the highly accelerated process nor the substance itself are legitimate in Israel's democratic system. Current and former attorneys general have been very explicit about this, some describing it as a coup d'etat. The associated legislation creates a supreme executive branch. It does so by greatly diminishing the independence and the powers of the judiciary branch in multiple ways, while guaranteeing extreme power to the executive branch and the closely controlled parliamentary majority in the legislative branch. It is important to note that Israel's system of checks and balances is built on only two legs, wherein the executive and legislative branches are tightly intertwined with the executive dominant. We do not hold separate elections for each, as in the United States. The planned legislation further targets the constitutional protection of all civil rights and weakens the rule of law. The reform, in quotation marks, enables racist, chauvinist, sexist, and LGBTQ-phobic legislation, direct action against judges and the media, the politicization of the security services, and a negation of anti-corruption measures. Furthermore, it undermines the protections afforded to Palestinians in the West Bank under Israeli and international law. A great number of high-level public figures, expert professionals, authoritative civil servants, and private citizens also have warned of the extreme and immediate risks to the economy, our national security, and regional stability. The current government includes religious and national extremists. Key ministers have previously been convicted of corruption and inciting racism. The Minister of National Security was convicted of supporting a terrorist organization. The Finance Minister, who also holds a ministerial role in the Defense Ministry, recently expressed support for wiping out a Palestinian village. These and other key partners are disproportionately powerful in the current coalition government. Without the democratic checks and balances which they plan to remove, these mercurial extremists might wield Israel's military and economic instruments of power without restraint. The nations of Israel and the United States share core values and common interests. It is on this firm basis that our special relationship has flourished. Israel's national security depends on this relationship. With this coup, extreme elements which do not share those values could try to steer Israel in a dangerously different direction. We fear the grave implications for national security. We need your urgent assistance. Please be involved with and aware of our situation and contact your representatives to support our democracy. That's pretty heavy stuff. So this is a letter that's out there. If anybody wants to look on my Facebook page, they'll be able to see it, where they can endorse the letter and then send it on to their representatives or to their senators. So let's just put in one more interesting thing here. Let's let people see this.
When out-and-out racist leaders like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir occupy positions of power in the current administration. And we cannot remain silent in the face of a trend that has been growing for years, that has now brought to power Israel's second annexationist government in 3 years. We must stand in solidarity with the hundreds of thousands of our Israeli brothers and sisters who have taken to the streets. I mean not only Israeli Jews, but world Jewry. I know it has been argued we have no right to protest the actions of a democratically elected government. I don't have to tell you, as an American citizen, how much damage a democratically elected leadership can do to the soul and democratic fiber of a nation in a short period of time. We, meaning world Jewry, don't pay taxes, we don't serve in the army, most of us, but Israel is the center of world Jewry. Israel profoundly impacts every Jew in the world. If, God forbid, Israel were in serious danger, we would all be in danger. So we have a stake in this game. I am an AIPAC guy. I've been on AIPAC's National Council. I've never done anything like this before. Most people who know me would consider me slightly right of center on Israel matters. The dangers to Israel's physical existence are so real as we speak that I've been criticize Israel in a public space, no matter who the audience is. This is not a time to despair. It's a time to act. Following the examples of Israelis in Israel who are taking to the streets to protect what is most precious to us. We are taking to the streets because we know what a gift we have in Israel, a gift that for 20 centuries our ancestors could only dream of. And we have it. And so we want to do our part to sustain and to preserve and to grow that gift for many, many centuries to come. Our efforts be crowned with success, B'ezrat Hashem.
Wow, heavy stuff. That was in Seattle, a protest that took place in Seattle, and we just want to inform you that there are protests like that happening all around the world. Just to give you an example, you'll see here from Los Angeles, New York, from Sofia in Bulgaria, from Australia, from all over the world. There are protests happening. We urge you to get involved with those protests. Hopefully on my Facebook page, you'll be able to see where protests will be taking place. And this is heavy stuff. I mean, we're coming down to the wire here. So we want to make sure you get into this. So in closing, excuse me, please. I want to give just a little bit of optimism here, and I'm not being sarcastic. What currently appears to be a constitutional crisis, we're hoping we're going to be able to turn it into a constitutional moment. And that is, in other words, that when all of this is over and the dust settles, it'll take a long time, I'm sure. But I'm hoping that finally we'll be able to get into the process of establishing a constitution, Bill of Rights. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So I don't know where we're going with that, but hopefully that's where we're headed. Do you want to add anything else, Ron?
I'm with you on the optimist. Usually I take the role of the pessimist, but maybe we'll talk about in our next podcast a little bit about what we base our optimism on in the future. And I think we're ready to sign off.
Yep. I think this has been a long podcast. We didn't expect it to be this long, but I think we got a lot of material out to you. I think a lot of it was interesting and even exciting, in addition to being depressing. So hopefully we're leaving this with a bit of optimism. Thank you, all of our viewers. Don't keep us a secret. Pass us on to whoever you can. And everybody and anybody who wants to be updated as to what's happening here, we're very happy to be your source.
Israel's slippery slope.
That's it. So, bye-bye. Shalom. Ila laka.